Father Claudio Doglio presents The Passion of Jesus according to Matthew. This is video number 5. Not what I want, but what you want. Jesus' journey with his disciples to the Mount of Olives leads them to a state called Gethsemane. It is a Hebrew term meaning oil press, and tradition identifies it with a cave where the press to press the olives was located, and around it a large garden full of olive trees. Evidently, Jesus knew the owner of this farm, who welcomed him repeatedly when, instead of returning to Bethany, the master wanted to stay closer to Jerusalem. Thus, on that tragic night, Jesus with his disciples enters Gethsemane. And as Abraham had said to his servants when he was about to go up to the Mount of Sacrifice, Jesus also says to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." The sacrifice of Isaac is remembered, and Jesus is at the same time Abraham and Isaac. He is the one who trusts in God and is the son who is ready to give his life. But he does not go alone. He takes with him 3 disciples, the same 3 that he had chosen so that on the mountain they could witness his divine nature. Peter and the 2 disciples of Zebedee follow him a little farther, while the others stop to sleep in the cave of Gethsemane. Jesus and the 3 take their ease among the olive trees, and Jesus began to feel sadness and anguish. The night scene of Gethsemane highlights the whole humanity of Jesus, who suffers sadness and anguish. Before the physical sufferings that he will have to face in the Passion, there is a spiritual passion, which is pain, disappointment, the bitterness of the human failures that Jesus experiences towards the authorities, towards the people, towards his disciples. For this reason, the evangelist puts on Jesus' lips the expression, "My soul is sorrowful even to death." He is sad to die. In Greek, he uses the rare adjective perilpos, which is repeated 3 times in a refrain reminiscent of Psalms 41 and 42. As the hind longs for the streams of water, why does my soul grieve? Why does it groan? Now Jesus prays with the words of that ancient psalm. His soul is sad, surrounded by a sadness that leads to death. He asks the disciples, "Stay here and watch with me." That is the human expression of the desire for friendship, of closeness with someone who understands, who feels the loneliness. Jesus goes a little farther and seeks contact with his Father. He falls on his face to the ground. It is an apocalyptic motive. The pain, the sadness, the anguish of Jesus leads him to a gesture of prostration. It is a gesture of great reverence. We find it mentioned in the book of Daniel, and many times in the Revelation of John, as the act of one who worships the divine majesty. Matthew presents Jesus with a prayerful attitude, as one who adores the Father's plan. And he addresses him with confidence. "My Father, If it is possible, let this cup pass from me, but not as I want, but as you will. Jesus taught to pray to God as Father because he feels that he is the Son and addresses God with the trust of one who calls him my Father. And he speaks to him about the chalice. It is a symbolic image. It is no longer the Eucharistic chalice. It becomes the chalice of passion, of suffering, of death. It is a proverbial expression derived from certain expressions of the Psalms used in the common Aramaic language of the time. The cup of death is suffering. It is to drink that difficult moment that marks the end of life. Humanly, Jesus fears death. He is afraid of suffering. He feels this cup of passion as a tremendous weight that crushes him, and humanly wonders if another way is possible. But he's willing to do the will of the Father, not as I will, but as you will. Jesus is the model of prayer and above all of the disciples' life. Jesus has taught as a teacher and as a witness. He has shown that filial trust. Whatever you will, my Father, I will have it also, despite feeling the sadness of death. Jesus returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He turned to Peter, who is a kind of corporate figure of all the disciples, so much so that he speaks to him in the plural. They were unable, they have no strength to stay awake. 1 hour only, and again another precious teaching. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The exhortation that Jesus addresses to the disciples is equivalent to a prayer formula that he inserted in the Lord's Prayer. Do not abandon us in temptation. He proposes to the disciples an attitude of awakening, of prayer, that is, of a conscious relationship with God, not to enter a desperate situation of remotedness. He does not ask not to be tested, but not to be abandoned at the moment of the test. Because if one enters consciously and in union with the Father, temptation is overcome. And the willing spirit is not enough. In words, Peter was willing to follow Jesus and give his life, but in fact, then he is afraid, he flees, he denies. Flesh is weak, humanity is fragile. There is a spirit with a willing will, but in fact, then at the moment of the test, there is no strength. The sleeping disciples, those who do not watch and do not pray, constitute for Jesus a real disappointment. They cause his sadness. For the second time, he withdraws and continues an analogous prayer. My Father, if this cup cannot pass without my drinking it, your will be done. This is another reference to the Lord's Prayer. It is the third invocation of the Lord's Prayer. Your will be done. Jesus taught us to pray like this. Jesus prays like this. He asks God to fulfill the Father's plan. He says, my will is to do your will. He truly demonstrates that the Son has one will with the Father. And when he returns, he finds the disciples still slumbering with heavy eyes. There is no human comfort in Jesus, and for the third time he goes away and prays with the same words until, after a long time, he returns to the disciples and says, perhaps without the irony, sleep and rest, the Greek text could be translated with a question of astonishment, sorrowful and pain, sleep and rest, and the hour is at hand. Now the solemn wording announces that the Son of Man is delivered to sinners. This is the meaning of the whole Passion. Freely Jesus, who is the Son of Man, the glorious one sent by God for the salvation of the world, is betrayed into the hands of sinful people. Sin seems to have the victory because it seizes the only righteous one and destroys him. But in reality, this gratuitous surrender of the Son accomplishes the will of the Father, who is the victory over sin. Arise, let us go. Jesus does not invite us to sleep or rest, but to get up. He asks the disciples to remain awake, to pray, and to get up. It is a resurrection imperative. It is equivalent to arise and let us go together. He who delivers me is near. But it is Jesus himself who gives himself. His human sadness teaches us to pray in the moment of difficulty so that we may not fall when we are in temptation, that our weak flesh may be strengthened by the Spirit of God, who is strong and can guide us to do always and well the will of the Father. Then Jesus came with them to Gethsemane and said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took along Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to feel sorrow and distress. Then he said to them, my soul is sorrowful even to death. Remain here and keep watch with me. He advanced a little and fell prostrate in prayer, saying, my Father, if possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples. He found them asleep, and he said to Peter, so you could not keep watch with me for 1 hour. Watch and pray that you may not undergo the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Withdrawing a second time, he prayed again, my Father, if it is not possible that this cup passes without my drinking it, your will be done. Then he returned once more and found them asleep, for they could not keep their eyes open. He left them, withdrew again, and prayed a third time, repeating the same thing. Then he returned to his disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let's go. Look, my betrayer is at hand.